ever get that feeling?
Yeah.
Like the world's on the edge of something, kind of unsettling, like we're living in a dystopian novel.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
Well, it turns out Octavia Butler was writing about that feeling decades ago.
Yeah.
That's why her work, I think, is even more relevant now than ever, right?
That's right. And what's fascinating is that Butler wasn't just, writing these entertaining stories. It was deeper. She was weaving these really intricate tapestries of social commentary.
Right.
Being a Black woman breaking into science fiction, which was and still is often dominated by white men.
Yeah.
She used her platform to explore race, gender, power, environmental collapse, all these issues that, well, they feel incredibly urgent today.
It's almost like, I don't know, she had this, uncanny ability to see these problems brewing, way back in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
And then extrapolate them into these, cautionary but strangely hopeful futures.
Yeah. It's incredible, really.
So today we are diving deep into the world of Octavia Butler.
Yeah, it's a world worth exploring.
Absolutely.
We'll unpack her really interesting writing style,
Yeah.
understand the unique challenges she faced, and discover why her work is, well, it's resonating so deeply with readers today.
Especially younger generations.
Especially the younger generation, the ones facing these challenges that she, predicted.
Exactly. And there's something about her work, it's more than just like science fiction. There's this raw honesty, this unflinching look at humanity, at our potential for good and bad.
Right. There's this darkness and light, all mixed up.
Yeah.
And it makes you think. Her stories often grapple with uncomfortable truths about, power, oppression, and survival.
Yeah.
But even within those narratives, there's always a glimmer of hope. This idea that even in the bleakest circumstances,
Right.
humans, we can find a way to connect, adapt, and even create change. So where do we even begin with a writer as prolific as Octavia Butler? Over a dozen novels, countless essays, awards galore.
Yeah, where do we even begin? It's a little daunting, isn't it?
It is, but I think a good starting point is, well, it's with Butler's own life.
Her personal experiences really, they deeply informed her writing.
Mm-hmm.
Growing up poor, facing racism and sexism, she often felt like an outsider.
Yeah, that makes sense.
These struggles, though, they gave her a unique understanding of social injustices, of the dynamics of power, and ultimately the complexities of the human spirit.
It's interesting. This woman who felt like an outsider used her voice to create these expansive worlds, these intricate narratives that now resonate with millions of readers.
It really is. And, that voice emerged early on. Imagine this, a 10-year-old Octavia Butler watching a cheesy sci-fi flick and deciding, I can write something better. That's determination. That's the spark of a powerful storyteller.
So she had the talent, the drive, but breaking into the science fiction world, especially as a Black woman in the 70s,
Right.
couldn't have been easy. It couldn't have been, no. It was a genre dominated by white men. She faced prejudice and dismissive attitudes. And there are accounts of, reviewers praising her talent, but at the same time, underestimating her.
Wow.
Likely because of her race and gender.
Yeah.
It's frustrating to think that someone as brilliant as Butler had to overcome those hurdles.
It really is.
Yeah.
But she did overcome them.
It did.
In 1976, she published her first novel, Pattern Master. That launched a 5-part series that explores complex themes of telepathy, mutation, and even an alien pandemic.
Wow.
It's classic sci-fi, but with Butler's signature depth and social commentary woven in. So it's not just, your regular aliens and spaceships kind of thing.
Right. It's so much more.
Yeah.
And that social commentary, it really takes center stage in Kindred.
Oh, okay.
Which came out just 3 years later, and it became one of her most celebrated works.
Yeah, I've heard of that one.
This is where we start to see Butler really pushing the boundaries of what science fiction can be.
Because Kindred, it's not your typical sci-fi adventure, is it?
It's not.
No. It blends historical fiction with time travel.
Right.
And it tells the story of a young Black woman in 1970s California who's pulled back in time to,
Antebellum Maryland.
Antebellum Maryland. Wow.
Yeah. And that time travel element isn't just a plot device,
Right.
It's a powerful metaphor for the enduring legacy of slavery and how the past, it continues to shape the present. Butler said she wanted readers to feel history.
Yeah.
Not just, know the facts.
To actually experience it.
Right. She wanted them to experience the horrors of slavery through the eyes of her protagonist.
It's a harrowing story, and I think it speaks to Butler's courage as a writer. She wasn't afraid to confront these painful chapters of history, and in doing so, she forced readers to confront them as well.
And it's important to note that Butler drew inspiration from the lives of her mother and grandmother, who faced, well, unimaginable hardship and discrimination.
Wow.
Their resilience, their will to survive, it infused her storytelling with a depth of understanding that few could match.
And through Kindred, she took this incredibly personal story, rooted in her family's history, and transformed it into this profound exploration of power, subjugation, and ultimately the indomitable human spirit.
Exactly.
You know, it's funny because we were talking earlier about how her work makes you think, and you're right, it really does.
It really does, and that's just the beginning. We've got so much more to explore in the world of Octavia Butler. Stay with us. So speaking of the indomitable human spirit, that kind of brings us to Wild Seed,
Okay.
which, like, Kindred really transcends, like, genre boundaries.
Oh.
You know, it's this blend of sci-fi, fantasy, historical fiction. There's even a touch of romance in there.
Really? So we go from time travel and slavery to immortal shape-shifting Africans.
Yeah.
Wow, Butler's range is incredible. So where does Wild Seed fit into, like, her larger body of work?
It's part of her Patternist series,
Okay.
but it stands on its own as this powerful exploration of identity, power, you know, and the ethics of control.
I see.
The story, it revolves around these two immortal beings, Anyanwu, who's a woman who can shapeshift and heal herself.
Wow.
And then there's Doro, who's a man who kind of manipulates and exploits others, you know, for his own purposes.
Okay, so we have this clash of ideologies then, like two completely different approaches to power.
Exactly. And that's what makes the book so interesting.
Okay.
You know, Anyanwu, she represents connection, community, nurturing. Doro, on the other hand, he embodies this domination and control, almost like a detached, like, scientific view of humanity.
Right.
And what makes Wild Seed so compelling is that Butler doesn't shy away from the complexities of their relationship.
Yeah, that makes sense.
They're both powerful, incredibly so, but their methods, their motivations couldn't be more different. And Anyanwu, she's constantly challenging Doro's approach,
Yeah.
forcing him and us as readers really to question, like, the very nature of power and its ethical implications.
Like, what does it really mean to have power?
Right.
Is it about control and domination? Or is it about, you know, something more nuanced, something that involves responsibility, empathy, maybe even collaboration?
Exactly. And what's especially remarkable, considering this book was written in 1980,
Well, yeah.
is how Butler uses these characters to explore, like, themes of gender and sexuality
Okay.
in ways that were just so ahead of their time.
So she was pushing boundaries back then.
Oh, absolutely. Anyanwu's ability to shapeshift lets her experience life in different bodies, challenging those traditional notions of gender, exploring the fluidity of identity.
That's incredible. She was challenging readers to expand their understanding of what it means to be human, to embrace these complexities of identity and experience.
Absolutely. And Wild Seed, with its exploration of power, identity, gender fluidity, it sets the stage for what Butler would later call visionary fiction.
Visionary fiction. Okay.
Yeah.
So she wasn't just writing about fantastical futures. She was using speculative storytelling to examine the present,
Right.
to challenge our assumptions,
Yeah.
to make us confront the potential consequences of our choices.
Exactly.
I feel like that element of visionary fiction really shines in her Parable series, don't you think? Her ability to, I don't know, imagine these really unsettling but strangely familiar futures?
Yeah, the Parable series is where Butler's, you know, social commentary, her almost prophetic insights become so clear.
Okay.
Like when Parable of the Sower came out, it was published in 1993.
Yeah.
The world she depicted, it seemed like this dystopian nightmare.
Right.
But now, so many of the issues she explored, you know, climate change, economic inequality, social unrest, that erosion of trust in institutions, it all feels, well, eerily familiar.
Yeah, you're right. It's unsettling, to say the least. So what does this world look like in Parable of the Sower? What makes it feel so relevant today?
Okay, so imagine Southern California, ravaged by climate disasters.
Okay.
The gap between rich and poor, it's this huge chasm. Resources are scarce, the government's failing, communities are walled off for protection.
Starting to sound familiar.
Yeah, violence and poverty, desperation, it runs rampant. You know, it's a world where the fabric of society is just fraying.
So it's like she took all the anxieties that were simmering back in the 90s and amplified them, showing us what could happen.
Yeah, like a potential future if we just ignore these anxieties.
And Butler, she was attuned to the, like, social and political currents of her time.
Oh, yeah. She lived in California, witnessed the rise of conservative policies, the dismantling of social safety nets, you know, that growing emphasis on privatization and individualism.
It's a lot.
It is. And she saw how all of these trends disproportionately impacted marginalized communities.
Right.
It's like she saw the writing on the wall, but
Yeah.
instead of just lamenting, the possibility of disaster,
Right.
she used her fiction to explore it, to unpack it, and
Yeah.
maybe even to offer some guidance on how to navigate it.
The Parable of the Sower, it offers some kind of path forward.
It does, not through technology or political solutions, but through a shift in human consciousness. This is where she introduces Earthseed.
Earthseed. Okay.
Not just as a religion, but as philosophy for survival, for adaptation, for finding meaning in a world that feels like it's falling apart.
I'm intrigued. Could you tell me more about this? What are its core principles?
Sure. At its core, Earthseed embraces change as the only constant.
Okay.
It emphasizes community, connection, recognizing our shared humanity.
Mm-hmm.
It encourages taking responsibility for shaping our destinies, even or maybe especially when the world feels chaotic.
So this is where we meet Lauren Olamino, the protagonist, right?
Yes. She's coming of age in this chaotic world.
Right.
But instead of giving into despair, she finds strength and purpose in Earthseed.
That makes sense. So she's not your typical dystopian protagonist.
Right. She's not like a hardened warrior or a cynical rebel.
Yeah.
She's thoughtful, compassionate, deeply spiritual. She embodies Earthseed, embracing change, seeking connection amidst the chaos.
So she's like a beacon of hope in a world that really needs it.
Exactly. And it seems like Butler, through Lauren and Earthseed, is showing us a different way of seeing the world.
Right. A different way of being in the world.
And it resonates so deeply with readers today, especially younger generations. The ones facing climate change, political instability, social injustice.
Yeah, that makes sense.
They see in Earthseed a framework for understanding these challenges,
Okay.
for finding meaning and purpose amidst the uncertainty.
So it's not about ignoring the problems, pretending everything is fine.
Right.
It's about acknowledging the darkness,
Yes.
but then finding ways to create light, to find hope, build community.
Precisely. And that's what makes Butler's work so powerful.
Okay.
She doesn't offer easy answers or, sugarcoat the realities,
Right.
but she does offer hope.
Okay.
Not in some magical savior or a technological fix,
Right.
but in the power of human connection,
Oh,
in
yeah.
our ability to learn, to adapt, to create change together. It's a message that feels so timely, so relevant to the world today.
Yeah, it really does. Yeah, it feels like Butler is handing us this, this roadmap for dealing with all this uncertainty, this reminder that, even in the darkest times, we have the power to choose hope, to choose connection, to choose action.
Yeah, and that's a really important point. It's not about, just being blindly optimistic. It's
Yeah.
about informed hope, a hope that comes from understanding the challenges we face, a willingness to, confront them head on.
Okay, so we've explored Butler's life, her groundbreaking novels like Kindred and Wild Seed, and that prophetic vision of the Parable series. What does this all tell us about her? About Octavia Butler as a writer, as a thinker?
Octavia Butler she was a visionary. She had this incredible ability to weave these really intricate narratives that explore these complex social and philosophical themes.
Right.
But they were also engaging, entertaining.
Yeah, her work wasn't just thought-provoking. It was moving, captivating, and like you said, hopeful.
Yeah. And her characters, they felt so real, so human. You connect with them, you root for them, even when they're facing, impossible odds.
I think that's one of the reasons why her work is seeing this resurgence in popularity today.
Yeah.
Readers are drawn to her stories because they offer this space to grapple with the complexities of our world, to explore those difficult questions about identity, power, the future of humanity, all while being entertained.
Exactly. And it's not just escapism, it's engagement.
Right.
Butler's work, it challenges us to think critically, to question our assumptions, to imagine new possibilities.
I think another reason for her resurgence is that the issues she was writing about, the ones that may have seemed like dystopian fantasies back then,
Yeah.
are now, they're part of our reality.
They are. Climate change, social unrest, political instability. These aren't just abstract concepts anymore. They're lived experiences.
Yeah. It's like she was looking into the future. But really, she was just paying attention to the present, to all those anxieties and changes that were already brewing.
That's it. And what's amazing is that Butler didn't just offer warnings.
Right.
She offered possibilities through her characters and their struggles. She showed us that even when facing these overwhelming challenges, humans can be resilient. We can adapt, find ways to connect, and create meaning.
So she wasn't just a prophet of doom.
No.
She was a weaver of hope.
Exactly. And that's what makes her legacy so powerful. She was a Black woman who broke barriers in a genre that wasn't always welcoming.
Yeah.
And she used her platform to amplify the voices of, well, the voices of those who are often marginalized, unheard.
She gave us these complex, nuanced characters,
Mhm.
many of them women of color,
Yes.
who challenged the status quo
Yeah.
and ultimately offered a vision for a more just and equitable future.
Her legacy is one of courage, of vision, and of an unwavering commitment to telling stories that matter. She forced us to confront those uncomfortable truths, to wrestle with ethical dilemmas, to imagine a world where things could be different. So as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of Octavia Butler,
Yeah.
here's something to think about. Butler often spoke about the power of positive obsession, that driving force that, makes us create, connect to make a difference.
Yeah.
What's your positive obsession? What are you passionate about? What change do you want to see in the world? And if you haven't already, I highly encourage you to explore Octavia Butler's work.
Yeah, it's amazing.
You might be surprised how much it resonates with you, how much it speaks to our current moment, and how much hope and inspiration you can find in her words.
That's great advice. Well, that's it for today's deep dive. Join us next time as we explore another fascinating topic. Until then, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep creating your own positive obsessions.